This is the regular City Council meeting for August 17th for the City of Minnetrista. In our first order of business, I would like to ask that we all or you join me in Pledge of Allegiance. I will say it, and if you can all kind of be respectful and join in silence anyway. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So with that, I'll start introductions, and I'll do a roll call again just to check and make sure all of our mics work. I'll start out with our Director of Public Safety, Paul Falls.
I am here.
Our Public Works Superintendent, Gary Peters. I didn't forget you this time.
I am here.
All right. Director of Administration, Allie Pulsos.
I'm here.
City Clerk, Chris Lindquist.
I am here.
City Engineer, Allison Fauski.
I am here.
And Adam Gabois, also here.
Present.
All right. City Attorney, Ron Beatty.
Here.
Our City Administrator, Mike Baroni.
I am here.
Finance Director, Brian Grimm. Okay, we can't. Brian, can you say that again? Brian, we can't hear you.
Here we go. Go ahead, Brian. Say something.
You can't hear?
Yeah, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you very well.
Is there anything with my settings?
He's there, but struggling with his sound, so he'll work on it.
Okay, well, you can work on that, Brian. I'm going to move on. Community Development Director, David Abel.
I am here.
All right, and council members present, I'm Lisa Whalen, I'm the mayor. We have council president, Pam Mortensen.
I am here.
Shannon Bruce.
I'm here.
Mike Molitor.
I'm here.
John Chumperland.
Here.
All right, so hopefully Brian can get his audio working better. So with that, we'll move on to approval of our agenda. Are there any other items we need to add? We can barely hear you, Brian. All right, so if there's no additions or changes to the agenda, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
This is Pam. So moved.
All right, motion has been made. Is there a second?
This is Shannon. I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made by Ms. Mortensen and seconded by Ms. Bruce. All those in favor will signify with aye. Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Mr. Chumperland?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
And Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
And I, Lisa Whalen, say aye. So motion passes 5-0. Tonight we don't have any special presentations. Mr. Baroni, do we have any persons to be heard?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
All right. So we'll move on to our consent agenda items. They consist of A through E, the resolution to approve our claims, a resolution to approve the step increase for Carter Osterly in Public Works, and a resolution to accept the resignation of Anisha Mueller, who is our Customer Service and Communications Assistant. And D is approve a final pay voucher for the 2019 Street Improvement Project. And E is a resolution to approve the early termination of Metropolitan Agricultural Preserve Program at PID number 20-117-24-23-001. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items A through E?
Madam Mayor, this is Shannon. I'd like to pull 2 items off the consent agenda, if I may.
Which ones? Which ones?
Item number A, the claims, and D, the final pay voucher.
Okay. All right. So that leaves that the remaining ones are B, C, and E. Is there a motion to approve B, C, and E?
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign.
We're going to have, Mike, you're going to have to mute that call. Mike?
To enable audio controls, please.
I just did, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have,
Yeah,
say that again?
this is John. I approve B, C, and E.
All right, a motion has been made to approve consent agenda items B, C, and E. Is there a second?
This is Shannon, I'll second.
All right, motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify with aye. John, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Shannon?
Aye.
Mike Molitor?
Aye.
Pam Mortensen?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Lisa Whalen, so motion passes 5-0. Ms. Bruce, you wanted to remove claims. You had some questions?
Yes, on page 10, about halfway down, there's a payment to Phoenix Fabricators for $223,000. And I talked to Mr. Baroni about this morning, and I know council approved the contract for this, but I'd like to see when invoices that are this large are paid, that perhaps the invoice can be put into the council packet just so we can see it and we can compare it to what we approved. It was hard for me just to see this and remember what we had approved before and was it the same amount. And it would just be nice for council to, especially on these huge payments, if we could just have an invoice in our council packet, that would be nice.
Yeah, this probably is only a partial payment. Isn't this for the water tower, Brian?
Can everyone? Go ahead. Are you on, Brian?
Yeah, I'm on my phone. So can people hear me?
Yes.
So okay, this would just be obviously a partial payment on the contract. That the total contract is obviously a lot larger than that. So this is just a progress payment on for the what amount of work they've completed so far.
So is there an option of putting that in the voucher or something in the packet?
I mean, if the council wants, I guess we haven't in the past put the council approves the budget and ultimately the contract for, the water tower project's about a $2.5 million project overall. But if the council wants, we could, I guess whatever, they'd have to give parameters or what the threshold is. It invoices over 200,000? Is it contracts that we have ongoing for streets and water tower and infrastructure? I guess we just need to know what the council would want to see.
Thank you, Brian. And I'd suggest a threshold of about $200,000 because I don't want to cause staff to have to put invoices into our packet for nickel and dime things. And even, we have some big street projects too, but I think over 200,000, I'd like to see the invoice. I don't know how the other council members feel about that, but anybody else?
Anybody else want to weigh in? Okay. All right. Any other questions, Ms. Bruce? And I'm sure that council or staff could provide you with that information if you ask. So, all right. Any other questions, Ms. Bruce?
Not on the claims. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the claims.
All right. Is there a second then?
This is John. I will second.
All right. A motion has been made and seconded to approve the claims as presented. Is all in favor will signify with aye. Mr. Chumperland, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
And Pam Mortensen?
Aye.
And Lisa Whalen, I vote aye. Motion passes 5-0. And next is item number D, approve the final pay voucher for the 2019 street improvement project. Ms. Bruce, that was you again?
Thank you. On page 18, it looks like we've got about a $46,000 savings that this came in under budget. And my question is, the the units of restoration, that were those attributable to the assessed properties on Deshane and Oxyoke Circle? I guess that's my first question. And if they are, then I have another question.
Would that be Mr. Grimm or Ms. Falsky?
Probably Ms. Fauske.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the improvements, I believe, included surface restoration. And when we final out these types of projects, we don't typically go and look through line item by line item, the assessable versus non. But I believe for this project, I believe all the costs were assessed, were included in the assessment calculation.
So, okay, thank you. So my question is, because we assessed these properties for this amount and it came in under budget, $46,000 under budget, can we refund this to those assessments that were put on those properties on Deshane Lane and Deshane Circle and Oxyoke Circle?
Madam Mayor, I can start to answer that if you would like.
Sure. Yep. Go ahead.
So certainly, so as it stands, there's an adopted assessment roll for this project that has a final assessment amount. So to change that amount of the assessment and process any refunds to the property owners would have to go through a process again, and Mr. Beatty can certainly jump in if I'm misspeaking on any of the terms. But there isn't with the adopted assessment roll as it stands, any change to that would have to go through the process. Now, as far as looking at what that amount would be, if that's the direction that council wants to look at going at, Mr. Gadbois included a few examples in his memo. It would certainly require some bookkeeping, so to speak, to go and look at what quantities were reduced and how the council would want to approach that. If you look at different assessment rolls for the different project areas, or if you just have one all-encompassing assessment roll for the project.
So I guess the question is, how complex is the process that you're referring to, or is that a question for Mr. Beatty?
I believe the process would, I believe it would include a public hearing to amend the assessment roll. I haven't gone through this process.
Well, I'm just trying to get an
assessment roll.
I'm trying to figure out if it's worth it, because were there about 30 properties that were assessed? That's the number that I recall. And it's going to be less than $2,000 a property, but I'm just trying to weigh if the process is cumbersome and lengthy and it's going to cost the city a lot to do it, it's not going to be worth it. But if it's something fairly simple, I think the assessed property owners would appreciate being refunded since it came in under budget.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I could provide some more information on this if possible.
Go ahead, Adam.
That over budget of 43, and really the amount that would go back for assessments would be half of that. The other half would, I mean, it was the city's cost to begin with. And we had just put in restoration in there, but there's some other items that we had in the contract that didn't have to be used. For instance, on these projects, we might run into some poor materials in the roadway. And so we keep some quantities in there to address that if necessary. And actually, we had pretty good material on most roadways. So that was another item where it didn't get used, and it led to the project coming in under budget. And then we also benefited from a really straightforward contractor who wasn't doing much nickel and diming and negotiating on this is extra work or this is not extra work. And so that's another reason why that came in under. But the number of properties too on the project that were assessed was 31. So just some more information for the council to consider there.
Okay, well, I'll take it off the table then, because if it was half that number, half the 46, divided up between 30 properties isn't going to be much. So never mind. Thank you.
It would be somewhat even more cumbersome considering that some of the homes in the areas have been sold, and it's possible that the former owners paid the assessment versus the current owners. So that might also be more cumbersome too. All right. Brian, Mike, you're going to have to put Brian on mute. All right, thank you. All right, so with that, then is there approval for the final pay voucher for the 2019 street improvement project?
So moved. This is Shannon.
All right, is there a second?
This is Pam. I'll second it.
All right, a motion has been made by Ms. Bruce and seconded by Ms. Mortensen. So all those in favor will signify with aye. Mr. Molitor.
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen.
Aye.
Mr. Trumperlin.
Aye.
Ms. Bruce.
Aye.
And I'm Lisa Whalen. I vote aye. Motion passes 5-0. So that concludes our consent agenda items. Moving on to our business items, we're going to start with the Woodland Cove Lake additions, and it's a resolution to approve the modifications to the easement agreement. I'm going to hand this over to, I think, David. Mr. Abel.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. There are two issues that have come up within the Woodland Cove development. The topics that we're discussing involve the lake lots within the first and second lake additions within Woodland Cove. So specifically, it's the lots that are on the lake. They're the farthest north within the development. The first issue, as the mayor just said, is involving the shoreland preservation easement. The second issue we'll be talking about is in regards to the lake shore setback and the application of the riparian viewshed setback requirement. Woodland Cove LLC has made a request to modify the shoreland easement to allow for accessory structures with a maximum of 120 square feet within that said shoreland preservation easement. As noted in the staff report, we do currently allow, per city code, detached accessory structures in the lakeside setback at a maximum of 120 square feet, as long as they're used for boat storage type activities. This shoreland preservation easement does not specifically call that out, but city code does, and hence therefore the request for the modification that's before you this evening. There is a second part to the modification of the easement. The request also includes removing the requirement for improvements like trails, steps, and accessory buildings to be located outside the view corridors, where that is located within the shoreline preservation easement. What they're finding is there are a couple of lots that if you were to apply this requirement of the easement, you're pushing those types of improvements into heavily wooded areas or steep slopes within the development. So for allowing for this modification would really help alleviate for that situation. The second issue, as I said, is regarding the lakeshore setback and the riparian viewshed setback. And what they're proposing is a compromise that's outlined within your staff report and packet. The riparian viewshed setback was not addressed in the original PUD approval. Staff nor the applicant can really explain why it wasn't addressed, and we don't recall it ever really coming up during the original PUD process for the Woodland Cove development. Likely something that just was overlooked and hasn't come up till now. Woodland Cove has been telling their customers and now would be residents that the lakeshore setback was 75 feet and they can build anywhere within the building pad area. The riparian view setback has not played a factor to date, as the homes you'll see in the PowerPoint presentation, the homes that have been built on the lake have been placed closer to the street side and not the lake side. So up until this point, the riparian view has not played a factor with the placement of those homes. So the applicant is requesting a compromise on what they have been telling customers and what the lakeside setback would be within the lake lots of the property. The applicant is with us this evening. Paul Robinson is acting on behalf of the Woodland Cove group and residents. He does have a PowerPoint presentation in your packet. I'll here in a second turn it over to Paul. It starts on page 77 of your packet. If everyone could go to that and follow along as Paul, once I turn it over to him, can give you some more detail. There's some nice diagrams that would help better illustrate what it is they're looking in terms of a compromise with this riparian view shed. So with that, I'll just quickly summarize what we're looking for from council tonight with the two different action items. As the mayor pointed out, there is a resolution in your packet which would amend the shoreline preservation easement if the council is okay with that. We did go ahead and amend that document and include it so you could see that specific language. And again, if the council is comfortable with that, we'd ask you to go ahead and adopt that resolution, which would approve that amendment. The second item is the PUD adjustment regarding the riparian view shed setback. And as you note in your agenda and your packet, there is not a resolution for that. What we're looking for is direction from council on how to move forward with this. If the council is okay with the compromise that's being proposed, we would work with the applicant and City Attorney Ron Beatty on bringing documents back for adoption at your next September 8th City Council meeting. So I just wanted to point the differences out there and what we're looking for you as council tonight. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Paul Robinson unless there's any questions of council. But as I said, he's got a very nice detailed PowerPoint presentation that he can give to council to explain this a little better. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Abel. Councilor, do you have any questions of Mr. Abel? I mean, I'm sure we can ask them later as well. Otherwise, I'll move this on to Mr. Robinson. So, Mr. Robinson, welcome. I'll hand this over to you and go ahead.
I'm just unmuting myself here. Thank you very much. Paul Robinson with Woodland Cove LLC. I just realized, as you know, we had planned on doing an update this spring with you guys as we've done the last couple of years, but with COVID, we didn't get to that. So overall, I would just say that Woodland Cove has had a pretty good year overall, and the neighborhood is really becoming a neighborhood, and I would say it's a really nice place to be in the city, and I think most of the residents in the Woodland Cove really appreciate being there. So it's been really fun to be involved with this development over the years, and it's really been a fun place for me to manage because it is such a nice neighborhood and because people really do appreciate being there. And so to that end, today, you know, we've gone a long way with this PUD without any real substantial changes to the core elements of the PUD. And, you know, we're just really getting close to the finish line, and we have the couple items that are on, I think if you go to 78, page 78, we really have just these two requests that David did a nice job introducing, but basically allowing 120 square foot accessory structure in the shoreline, basically mainly as, you know, a boathouse or a boat accessory use for people to, this really came up a long time ago on a lot that they're quite a distance from the lake, so they really were looking toward having enjoying a boathouse down by the lake. And then the second change is just this PUD adjustment to adjust the setback, and I'm just going to go through a few examples in a minute. So if you go to 79, I think David also explained kind of why this, I'm going to start with the issue of the shoreline easement and the accessory structures. So it's kind of complicated because at first we were going to try to do one easement over the shoreline with the city and the Minnehaha Creek buffer. And when we got to the point of trying to merge the two, it just became too complicated, and we ended up recording two easements, the shoreline preservation easement and then the Minnehaha Creek easement. On top of that, we also have our own architectural guidelines, our own declarations that have some restrictions. We have the shoreland overlay, and we have the city code, the general standards, which allow for the 120 square foot structure, but also have other requirements. And so it's just one of those things where we had met with staff in Minnehaha Creek back in 2018, and we just, all of us together, just kind of did not pick up on some of the requirements in the shoreline easement and what it might mean to us. If you go to page 80, I just show you quickly the area of the shoreline easement. It's a little fuzzy, but the dark gray area is the shoreline easement, which kind of makes up a whole bunch of different things. It's the impact zone, the shoreline impact zone, it's the bluff area, it's the Minnehaha Creek watershed buffer. And so we kind of wrapped it all together into one big easement. Next page, 81. So where this is the first homeowner who actually had requested this in 2018, where we went through kind of a long process trying to make sure that it would work. And I'm showing you this to show kind of the relative size of the building, the 120 square foot structure, related to all of the green area on this slide. That's basically the shoreline preservation easement. And basically in our code, we ask that these structures be related to the house. So they don't have to match exactly the house, but they have to have elements that relate to the house architecturally. And so then if you go to slide 82, that's another example of a structure that their home is more, has a lot of stone on it. So they have a stone boathouse that basically matches their house. The green area along the lot, this is actually two lots that were combined. You can see the accessory structure. If you go to page 83, basically what we're asking for is to add into the into your, and I think you have a copy of this in your packet, but just as in addition to steps and trails, accessory structures. And as David had mentioned, that accessory structures are allowed currently in the general standards of the code. And then as the general standards also allow these stairs and steps and sidewalks to go within the view corridor when it's not practical to go outside the view corridor. And so we're asking for that change as well. If you
so
go to
Paul, excuse me, Mr. Robinson, just for clarification. So currently they are allowed to put stairs and steps and trails in the easement?
Yes.
Okay, and so the issue is, according to the easement, they're not allowed to put it in the view corridor?
Right.
Okay. Just great. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's great. I kind of was winding down. So on this one,
okay.
So on 84, basically on this particular item, we have unanimous support from all of the Cove Lakeshore owners. I had a meeting a couple weeks ago with all of the Lakeshore owners, or most of them, and then I followed up individually with others, and I provided an email or an attachment that showed email supporting, emails with each resident supporting it. It's so, basically it's currently allowed by city code, and we have other architectural controls to ensure sort of, I guess, consistency with the main structure that's on our side. And some of our residents are concerned about that. And so that's, I think, it's up to you, Mayor Whalen, but if you have any questions about this first request, maybe we do that now, and then I'll talk about the second one.
Right. Yeah, let's do one at a time. I think it'll be a little less confusing and a little more clear. But yeah, I don't have any other questions. Council, any questions of Mr. Robinson? Okay. I'm not hearing any, so it sounds like the easement, for the easement accessory structures. Okay. Do we want to move on to the next one? Council, we're going to be taking this. This one would be the one where we have a resolution. And this is the one where we would need to be making, if you will, taking a vote and doing a resolution. The other one is simply giving direction to staff. So I'd like to kind of close this one out before we move on to to the riparian view shed one. So anybody have any issues with this? Otherwise, is there a motion to approve the modifications to the easement agreement as presented in our packet?
This is Shannon. I'll
make a
second
motion
it.
to approve.
Okay, I think I got two people here. Either that or it's a echo. So Ms. Bruce made the motion to approve. Is there a second?
I approved it and Shannon both approved it. It's Pam.
Okay. All right. So Pam, I'm assuming you'll be okay with the second on that.
Yes, that's fine.
All right. All right. So a motion has been made and seconded to approve resolution number 89-2020, approving modifications to the easement agreement for Woodland Cove. Is there any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor will signify with aye. I'll go first. Lisa Whalen, I vote aye. Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Trumperlin?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes 5-0. So, Mr. Robinson, now we'll move on to the riparian view shed part of it.
Okay, great, thank you. So this starts on page 85 of your packet. Again, this is a PUD adjustment for the lakeshore setback. So I'll maybe repeat a little bit of what David said, but in our PUD, we had an exception approved to a 75-foot lakeshore setback, which, so typically for a PUD, it's 112.5. And basically up till not that long ago, we had thought that was what the absolute, setback was for the lakeshore, even though you'll see many people have gone quite a bit further back from the lake than that. And where this came up is just recently a customer's architect called, and because we have more homes now, there's more instances where the view shed applies. And so a customer called, their architect found out about the riparian view shed rule, and that's when the bell, raised the red flag for me about this issue. So as David mentioned, we'd really never discussed it in our PUD approvals, and I'll just say to David's credit, he did bring it up to me a couple of years ago in a meeting on a different topic, and I wrote in my narrative. I just don't know what happened at that point. All I can think of is that we thought that I went back and read the PUD agreement and thought that we already had the 75-foot lakeshore setback approved. But that being said, we're here today, and so we took the time to just sort of analyze this rule and its impact on our remaining lots and on our current lots. And we had one particular lot just get impacted, and they were able to adjust their home plan to meet this code for now. But then we were concerned about the remaining lots we had and about anybody wanting to come in just for, to expand a deck or have any kind of, other impact in the future. And so it's just felt like it was a good time to proactively take care of this. If you go to page 86, I assume most of you are real familiar with your view shed rule, but basically it creates another setback, more restrictive setback than the 75-foot lakeshore setback. And there's really two ways it gets applied. One is kind of a straight line between the back of the two homes, and the other is the average of the closest point to the lake of the neighboring two homes. If you go to the next page, 87, and I set this up as a PowerPoint, but I turned it into something that I could, we could click through. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to be clicking a lot or telling you to move pages a lot. But so basically, here's lots 7, 8, and 9. Lot 8's obviously the one that doesn't have a home yet in the middle. So you draw a line between 7 and 8, and 7 and 9. So that's the kind of how the straight line rule would get approved. If you go to the next page, 88, you can see that. So where we showed people, what we always told people is they could go as close as 75 feet, but generally they had the indicated building pad to build within. And so in this case, that little red square in the corner gets impacted on the approved building pad. It's kind of where they were going to put a little porch, but they ended up moving it more to the middle, and it worked out. The green area, and I'm not only showing it on this slide, but the green area is where we thought we had the flexibility to go to with a home. If you click to 89, this is the other way that the rule can get applied. It's the average of the closest points on the two neighboring lots. So in this case, it's 115 feet If you click to 90, page 90, you can see that meandering 115-foot line. And if you click to page 91, the red area is the area of the indicated building pad that would be impacted by that particular rule. If you go to page 92, I just overlaid both of the ways that this rule gets applied. So it's the lesser of the two. So in this particular instance, the straight line would be the lesser of the two. If you click to 93, what we're wanting to add to this riparian view is the indicated building pad. So that's the green area. If you click to 94, basically that's the outcome of what we're asking for. We're fine with the idea of not going to 75 feet in all instances if we can apply the viewshed rule, allow people to build an indicated building pad that was approved with our final plat. And so that green area would become the new area that somebody could build in. And I just have a couple other quick examples. So then just on the other side of this lot 8, so now we're on lot 10, here's an example of how the straight line rule would be applied, and the red area would be removed from that indicated building pad. If you go to 96, that shows the average. If you go to 97, you can see the impact of that average. And if you go to 98, you can see the red area that's removed. This works a lot better when I'm clicking on a PowerPoint. And if you go to 99, you can see in this instance, the lesser of the two happens to be the average. So, but while that doesn't look like much impact on the lot, because this is kind of a funky lot with the front, because the front is sort of just a small triangle, this home is likely to go a little bit further back. And they're likely, a lot of those homes, if you look at our overall homes, often have like a deck or a porch kind of near the middle. And so it kind of impacts somebody's design because it happens, makes them push this to, the lot to one side or the other, or the porch to one side or the other. And then on page 100, we just show the indicated building pad. Page 101, this is sort of the outcome of what we're requesting, where when the viewshed rule applies, because it doesn't apply on every single lot, but where it applies, you first do, the indicated building pad, then, the lesser of the line between the two, or the average lakeshore setback. But obviously in no case would it be closer than 75 feet. So if you go to, I just want to show you just kind of how this played out. We really got kind of lucky the way it played out, honestly, because we just haven't had this, because of the way things were built, we had some homes go to the back of the pad early on. And so on page 102, you can see the example where lot 5 built to the back of the building pad, but had lot 4 and lot 6 built first. And if you click to page 103, you can see that the back of that home, that today is one of our first homes, it's a really nice home on the channel, would not have been able to be built. And, and it also affects, them wanting to add on to their deck or do something in the future. And so that's one of the areas why we're concerned. If you click to page 104, we're also concerned about these 3 remaining lots that we have that aren't built on yet. Click to page 105. I put that same home that we just looked at on lot 5 on lot 2. And in this instance, if lot 2 were to build tomorrow, they could build all the way to the back of the pad, no problem. They could go up to the 75-foot setback, no problem, because there isn't a home on lot 1A, so the riparian viewshed rule doesn't kick in. If you click to page 106, but however, but if that didn't happen, and I actually think this is the most likely scenario, but because I have a customer on 1B that's ready to go, and our customer on lot 2, they live on Lily Lane, it's Scott Pekarek. They're taking a little bit more time getting their plans together, and but if you were to build the same home that's on lot 1, on lot 1B, and if you click to page 107, you can see all of a sudden that lots 1A and 2 lose a third of the buildable area that they thought they had. So, and then finally, if I go to, there's a few slides here, but it's kind of near the end. Just click to 108. 108 shows all of our lakeshore home sites. You can see the 75-foot setback. You can see all the indicated building pads. And in red in outlines, you can see all the homes that have been built to date or in the planning stages, and I had their plans. And so far, with one exception, everybody has stayed within the building pad. There's just one on the peninsula that's going a little bit more to the side, but it's because they have a really wide lot, and we just didn't take any trees off to the sides. So we left it up to the customer. If you go to page 109, you can see that so far to date, we've really only had 5 homes of the entire development go to the back of the indicated building pad. Page 110, we've only had 1 home ever get to the 75-foot line, and the vast majority of homes, and it's kind of fuzzy so it's hard to read, but are over 100 feet. And so, it's not that we're trying to ask for something that's going to make everybody move their homes really, really close or create some inconsistencies. And then if you go to page 111, this is just a recap of what I've been talking about, so I'm not going to go through it one more time. Page 112 again shows the 2 examples that I talked about earlier about what would be the outcome of our request. And then page 113, why does this make sense? I mean, we have support of all the lakeshore owners in the cove for this change or this adjustment. We have larger lots generally, which I think aren't necessarily always around the whole lake. They're 3/4 acre lots, 125 foot wide. That's the kind of the average on the channel and the North Lake lots. Our peninsula lots are larger. They have large building pads, and the lots always assume some variation in the home location. So if you were to look at our indicated building pads, you'd see that there always had been a little bit of variation toward the lake of our of building pads, and people were notified of that. And I think that the change that we're requesting is reasonable, and I think it will reduce or even eliminate variances in the future. So I think with that, I was just going to, on 114, I just have a slide that says questions. So if there are any questions about this particular request.
Okay, thank you. That was very fast, but thank you very much.
Was that too fast?
No, that's fine. No, thank you, Mr. Robinson. A lot of good information, and your PowerPoint with the diagrams was very good to have. So thank you for doing that. Council, questions? Maybe I'll start with Mr. Molitor. Any questions, comments?
No, I think everything in the packet's pretty self-explanatory, so I really don't have anything. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Ms. Mortensen?
I agree with that, and I do appreciate the information that it is being supported by all lakeshore owners at the Cove. That means a lot to me, anyways.
Okay. Mr. Trumperlin?
I understand more now than I did after I looked through it 2 times on my own.
I agree with that.
Is the question, I guess, and maybe I missed it somewhere along, the option of using one or the other, or whichever one works best for the lot in question?
Do you want me to answer that, or?
Yeah, Mr. Robinson.
So I think if you went to page 112, what we're asking for is basically the lesser of the 3 combined. So it would be in all cases the building pad, and if the riparian viewshed rule allowed you to go slightly further, then you would add that to the indicated building pad. So you can see in the examples on 112 that there's a little piece, not much, but a little piece on the corners that is added to the potential for somebody to build a little closer.
Right, but then, so that's the one on the left on page 112. Then on the one on the right, you would use the other.
Yes. So in one case, it's a straight line. In the other case, it's the average,
right. The average.
Which is,
yep.
Yeah, which is a bit like
Thank
the
you.
riparian viewshed rule reads.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Bruce?
Thank you. I've never been a fan of our riparian viewshed ordinance, and I don't have any problem with what Woodland Cove is trying to do here. I think it's perfectly fine. They've all agreed that it's fine with the property owners, but I think this is an example of how an arbitrary decision, and if not necessarily a new development like this, but an arbitrary decision about where somebody puts their home way back on a property can impact the property rights of someone else that is in the lot next door to them. And I'm not going to go into it here, but I think this illustrates why our riparian viewshed ordinance is it's just problematic, and all it does is make people come to the city for variances that they shouldn't need to request. But I'm fine with this and what they want to do with it. I don't have a problem with what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I too, I don't have
Madam
a problem
Mayor?
here. Yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yep.
Since
Yep.
the door was open, I'd like to address that. There is a reason for the riparian viewshed. Not all, and it's noted in the packet here. Why does this make sense? Well, they're large lots. They're 125 feet wide. Not all lots in the lake are like that. And to the point about arbitrarily subjecting to some setback rule, goes just the other way around as well. All of a sudden, you have something in front of you that wasn't there before. That is just as arbitrary as well. So, yeah, we will not get into this in this meeting, but there's a reason for this rule, and I do support this request, but I do not support getting rid of the riparian viewshed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molitor. So I think we're all in agreement that we're fine with this change, and that would then give both the developer and the property owners some hopefully some can go back and sleep well tonight, and then it'll also give our staff some direction as to how to draw up the resolution that will be brought back at our next meeting, which would be September 8th. Staff, David, do you need anything else from us?
No, thank you very much, Madam Mayor and Council. We have good direction here. We will be bringing an item back, likely on your consent agenda on your next council meeting, that will solidify this direction that you're giving us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Robinson, again, thank you for coming and for your very good presentation. I think, as Mr. Chamberlain pointed out, it really helped clarify when you went through it, because just reading through it wasn't quite good enough. So I'm glad you came and did your presentation. Thank you for taking your time and doing that for us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for bearing with me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. So then that concludes that business item. So we'll move on now to item number B, and that's approve a change order for 1 and 2 for the 2020 local street improvement project. I believe that's Ms. Belsky.
I believe
lost anyone?
Adam,
Okay.
would you like? No, Adam, did you want to take this, or would you like me to introduce it?
Yes, Ms. Fauske, I would love to take this one.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council. Yes, as Mayor Whalen indicated, this is an item to approve change orders 1 and 2 for the 2020 street improvement project. We've got a description of each change order here on the memo. I'll just give a brief overview of each of them. The first one is a monetary change order. There were some changes in pipe condition at the connection point for the sanitary sewer force main. Some record plans indicated one pipe size and it happened to be another. So unforeseen change there, and the contractor had to get a special fitting to make that attachment. And that took a little extra time, and so they requested compensation for their utility crew and the extra fitting that was used. Additionally, they, in the process of replacing some water main gate valves with the project, we're attempting to locate the water main out there, and those utilities can be tricky to locate. This one in particular was at an intersection, and they don't always trace out very well. And so they had just been marked improperly. So the contractor ended up having to dig 2 holes, approximately 8 feet deep instead of just one. So they had requested compensation for that work as well. And we've reviewed the change orders. We actually negotiated down the cost at about half of it for the connection to the lift station. And we thought that the rest was appropriate. We had our observation staff on site during both of these extra work, things that took place, and so they observed the extra time that was required and the extra work. And so we do feel that the amount in change order 1 is appropriate, and I'll discuss that financial impact after I discuss change order number 2. Change order number 2 has to do with the project schedule, and the contractor requests a 2-week extension to the substantial completion date. And substantial completion is almost everything to do with the project besides punch list items and final closeout. They're requesting a 2-week extension on everything, but a lot of the work is already completed. The utilities are all on the ground. The curb went in late last week, the concrete curb that is, and they're working on grading and prepping the road for paving. Right now they're shooting for Thursday, the 20th. I was out there today, and due to the rain events we've had, I think that's going to be delayed, and really that's kind of why they're requesting this 2-week extension. Is if the weather takes a turn as it has the past 2 weeks with these substantial rainfalls, it could slow them down, and they're just being proactive. So they brought this up at the July 29th meeting, and at that time Ms. Fauske and I had asked for them to prepare a formal request in writing so that the council could review the justification for the contract extension. I won't read through that. It is included in the packet there, the correspondence we received via email, and they just kind of talk about why they perceive a 2-week extension is necessary. And we don't see an issue with that. We did have a tight schedule proposed, less than 2 months, basically right around 2 months to completely begin and finish this project. And that was in an effort to just expedite things for the residents there, who have been very patient and great so far during construction. But we do think that 2 more weeks would really help the contractor out. They have been on site every day that they could be to work on the project, and so we do think it's justified. Lastly, I'll just discuss the fiscal impact of change order 1. It results in a contract addition of $4,357.37, and that increases the contract total amount to $727,655.15, and obviously no change in the contract price due to the schedule extension. So I would stand for any questions on either of these change orders or about the project in general at this time.
Mr. Gadbois, could you tell us, so it says substantial completion date of September 11th, but the final completion date of October 14th. What would be the substantial completion date? What all would that include?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, so the substantial completion, the way we've written the contract, is basically everything. It's putting the new force main in and testing it and getting that to pass, replacing the water main gate valves and hydrants as indicated in the plans, adding the storm sewer, which is all installed. Everything I'm listing here is already completed. Grading the ravine and adding energy dissipation riprap, that's completed. And then actually paving both layers of pavement, both the base layer of 3 inches and then the additional wear course layer of 1.5 inches over the top, and restoring the turf area behind the curb. So if you were to come look at the project for substantial completion, in this case, you would say it looks like it's done. We put that final completion date about a month out, and that's in order to handle any punch list items. If there's a mailbox that's broken and we need to repair it, small things like that, and also work on all the closeout documentation. So again, for this, substantial completion is essentially a completed
Okay.
project.
Thank you. And that date is September 11th. So, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Gadbois. Council, any other questions? All right. Hearing none, then is there a motion to approve change order number 1 and 2 for the 2020 Local Street Improvement Project, CP 01-20.
This is
So
John
moved.
P. So moved.
Okay, Mr. Chamberlain made that motion. I believe Ms. Mortensen seconded that.
I did.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And any further questions or discussion? All right. Hearing none. All those in favor signify with an aye. Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Chamberlain?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
And I, Lisa Whalen, I vote aye. Motion passes 5-0. So thank you, Mr. Gabois. Nice presentation too. So next we'll move on to approve change order number 1 for the 2020 overlay project. This is what the council had discussed regarding adding Fielding Trail. Who is that?
Madam Mayor, I'll take that one as well.
All right.
Perfect. All right, thank you. So yes, this is change order number 1 for the 2020 overlay project, which has not begun yet. We just got executed contracts, but we did want to circle back with the council. We talked about this at a previous meeting, which is to include an additional street because we did receive such favorable prices from the low bidder, W.M. Mueller and Sons, on this, sorry, the low quote of W.M. Mueller and Sons on this project. They quoted for the 3 streets that were originally included $93,994.90, which was substantially lower than the budgeted amount, which had a contingency in it. But because it was lower and because it was below $175,000, it could remain a quoted project and we could add work to the contract per Minnesota state statute. We did review that after that council meeting internally with the city attorney and reviewed the statute language. So we did reach out to the contractor. They were more than happy to add the work and at the unit price, which they had already quoted prior to even knowing that a 4th street would be included. So there was a benefit there that the unit prices is being honored to perform the work, and also that a street within close proximity to these other streets could benefit from the same proposed improvement. So for Fielding Trail, we do have change order number 1 included as attached, signed by the contractor, and that cost is estimated at $34,394.21. Because the project hasn't occurred yet, we do have unit costs, but we do track quantities as projects progress, and so that's what we've estimated based on what the design quantity of bituminous material and millings and other unit price work would be, and so we're fairly confident that that's where that's going to be. So, but again, that work hasn't occurred yet, so typically a change order work may have already occurred and you're coming back after the fact. So we would recommend approving change order 1 to include Fielding Trail and compensate the contractor for that work. The change order number 1 would result in an increased contract amount of $128,389.11. And I'll take any questions on change order 1 for the 2020 overlay project.
And Adam, if I'm not mistaken, they were also asking for an additional, what was it, 2 or 3 days?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I don't have that language in the discussion. If you review the actual change order document, it does add the 2 working days. It's a 10 working day contract as of now. That's already got a good buffer on there. The contractor had just asked for 2 more days, and we will be having our pre-construction meeting with them on Wednesday of this week, at which time we'll get a more detailed schedule and we'll have a good idea of whether or not they plan to use all those 10 plus 2 days, or if they're somewhere in the middle of that range.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of council? All right. So I think we had originally budgeted at like around 136, 137,000. This still falls under that. And as Mr. Gadbois pointed out, we may still have a change order depending on the quantities, but we should still end up under our $136,000 budget. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none then, is there a motion to adopt resolution approving the change order for the 2020 overlay project? Okay, is there a motion? Is there a...
So moved. This is Pam.
All right, so Pam made that motion. Is there a second?
This is John T. L. second.
All right, so John made that motion and Pam seconded that. And all those in favor would signify with aye. Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Chumperland?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
And I'm going to abstain due to the fact that this is the street where my property is located, so I'll be an abstention.
All right, and I'll vote aye, so it's 4 ayes, 1 abstention. Motion passes. So next we go on to our MSA fund balance and discussion. I believe that's Ms. Falsky.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. We discussed the Halsted Road project, reconstruction project, and the amount of state aid funds that the city received. After that discussion, direction was given for me to go back and provide council some more background as far as how much of the construction costs are remaining state aid to be reimbursed via state aid. So included in your packet is a summary of the project. We had state aid eligible construction costs just over $2.2 million. And at the time that the city council had approved the project, the state aid fund balance was at just over 1.9 million. And prior to that year's allocation, when the project planning was underway, we hadn't received the state aid allocation yet for that year, and we were around 1.3 million. So we have that summary in the packet there. And subsequently through the years, because of the timeline of that project, the city did receive over $650,000 in state aid allocations, which bolstered that state aid fund balance and provided more funds available to the council to get reimbursed, so to speak, for some construction costs for that project as before we close out the account. So this account has not been closed out. As council may recall, we just there was just a additional $11,000 approved at the last meeting in order to cover some additional costs that the city had incurred with this project. So to summarize the where we're at with state aid eligible costs on let's see, it's page 180 of your packet. You can see a summary of what the state aid eligible costs are, less the requests that have already been made to state aid, which leaves just over $944,000 worth of state aid funds available for reimbursement for this particular project. So the reason we were talking about this was if the City Council wanted to take a look at getting some additional reimbursement through state aid for the Halsted project, that would go into the roads fund, which would basically be paying the city back for some of the city costs with the Halsted project, and thereby those funds would be made available for future road projects. So in preparing this, I wanted to try to give the council a good idea of what we're looking at for what we're projecting for state aid fund balance, which is also included on page 180 of your packet. As I indicated prior to this evening, we have been told by MnDOT that to expect a 15% reduction in state aid allocations due to COVID. They haven't received the gas sales tax revenue this year, so we are anticipating a decrease in funding, which is shown in the projections on in that table on page 180. I've also included some pending project costs for the potential Sunnyfield project, which we've discussed with the council. So I've shown that amount in projected construction costs in 2021, and then just left allocations to be conservative in this standpoint for 2022, 2023, and 2024 at the same level that we're anticipating for 2021, just to be conservative again for this instance. So again, we're looking at what the council would like to, if the council would like to entertain additional reimbursement through the state aid fund. At the last council meeting, we talked a little bit about, the road levy proposed through the budget is at $700,000, and we're projecting for an ending construction fund balance of the roads fund at the end of this year at I believe it's $305,000. So we're just over $1 million anticipated going into 2021, and when looking at a local street improvement project, we had looked at hardscrabble, but then there was some desire to discuss if Loring and Stonebridge could be added into that project. Now, in order to do that, we would need over $100,000 more to add Loring and Stonebridge, and we might want to look at some contingency. So that's where we started looking at, well, should we look at having some state aid funds from the Halstead Drive project reimbursed to pay back into that roads fund so that we could look at doing some additional local street improvements in 2021. And it's not an action item for council. It's a discussion to give staff direction this evening. I can answer any questions here tonight, or if there's something, some additional analysis, I can certainly bring this back to the council.
Thank you, Ms. Falskate. I'm going to weigh in first here and then open it up, but I really feel strongly that we should apply for the full amount. I would rather have this money in our coffers, gaining interest and allowing us to use these funds where we see on which roads we would see appropriate. If we leave the funds in the MSA account, then once this project, the Halstead project, is closed out, we no longer have that ability to withdraw those funds for that project. And that then limits us as to what we can do with those funds. If we put it in our coffers, we then have complete control over where we spend those funds on which roads. Having said that, we can still earmark the money that we need for the Sunnyfield Road project. So if we anticipate getting $214,000 in 21, that certainly wouldn't cover the cost. We can still earmark some of that $944 to cover those costs, but it would still give us a nice chunk of change to do the Loring Drive and the Stonebridge, along with some of our overlays that we've been kind of putting off and pushing off. Who knows, maybe we can even do another road. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'd rather get it, put it in our coffers, start getting interest on it ourselves versus MSA, and then being able to designate and to decide where we're going to be spending it. Anybody else want to weigh in? Mr. Molitor, I know you're maybe you'd like to say something.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I just want to make sure I understand that the window for getting these funds closes when we close out the project, which I assume is coming up shortly. Do we have any idea what time frame that is?
Ms. Fauske?
Councilmember Molitor, the project is, the timing of closing out the project is actually in the city's hands. We haven't closed out the project yet, and to my knowledge, MnDOT, while they like to have projects closed out in a timely manner, I've yet to see them come to a city and say, this project's been done for a year, please close it out. So I don't know that there's a pending time frame from that perspective.
Okay. the reason why I ask is, while I generally agree with your comments, Mayor Whalen, the one thing I'm concerned about is I would like to see us get a specific additional roads on the agenda for those funds. We've talked about Stonebridge and the whole hardscrabble, and I think this would obviously allow us to do that. If we took the whole chunk of money, it would allow us to do more. And I think while I agree we can put some towards overlay, I think we need to look at some of the other roads that are in dire straits. I continually, almost on a weekly basis, get requests about the road I live on, Minneapolis Avenue, that is been patched again. Thanks Gary and crew, but we need to start thinking about getting that on the agenda. And I know Morningside's out there, and there's a few others too. And I think before we ask for the funds, I'd like to have some discussion about timing of some of these things, because if we're not doing it now, I think at least owe residents some idea of what the time frame would be. And if we make this request, I think we can start putting some time frames out there. So I agree with the concept. I just think we need to start getting some specific roads tied to those funds. Thank you.
Okay. And again, we can request those funds and have them in our coffers while we're then getting interest on it, and then discuss what you're talking about. Yeah.
Right. I get that. And, the interest in this environment is going to be close to none, unfortunately, because basically interest rates are zero. But I get your point.
Yeah.
But I do want to make sure that we've got some. I want to be able to answer to people to say we are going to take these additional MSA funds and we are going to use them for this particular road. And I think that makes answering that question a lot easier. And we've obviously spent a lot of time looking at the roads. We know which ones are on the short list, and I think we need to start putting some names and time frames with that short list, and so we can deliver on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree. All right. Anybody else?
This is John T. Two questions. One, as I recall, there's a threshold balance that for these funds that we actually need to spend to be able to continue. What is that number?
Madam Mayor, yes, Madam Mayor, it's 1.5 million.
Okay. And second question, then on that page 180 that you were on, looking at your little chart there, 2020, you show the 11,000 that we approved. So are we saying, am I saying, if we call on the 944,000, then that would drop the end of year balance down to 4.25 approximately?
That is correct.
Okay. I agree with Mr. Molitor and Mayor Whalen on the approach. All of those things are positives. I agree with that.
All right. Anybody else?
This is Shannon. I agree for requesting the reimbursement, and I would like to see some of this go to overlay projects, because that does extend the life of roads. And I agree with Councilmember Molitor too, that we need to identify the roads that we're going to use this money on. But I also support using a chunk of it for the overlay, because that does extend the life of the roads, and it forestalls having to assess people again, like we just did. But what we just did on Fielding Trail and Sterling Drive and Retreat and Game Farm, that's going to keep all these residents from having to be assessed again for a good 5 more years. So I think there's a balance, but I think we can figure out how to prioritize what we need to do with it. But I think it's a good idea to request reimbursement.
Okay. Ms. Mortensen?
I agree with all that was said. I like what we've been doing with our plans, and I think between Gary and Allison and Adam, they've done a really good job of highlighting the priorities and making good presentations and suggestions. So I think all the suggestions are good.
Okay. All right. So if Mr. Molitor, let me ask you a question. So you were talking about prioritizing. We would want to start doing that right away so we know what the game plan is for 21. And because we're going to have to start planning on any additional roads like Loring and or Stonebridge. And we also need to start thinking about doing some overlays and or other roads. So having said that, I think we're going to have another roads discussion very soon, possibly even if our engineers can put this together with Gary, maybe even at our next work session if we can. Is that an option, staff?
Yes, Madam Mayor, that's something that we can work towards and have some more detail. It's been a year since the council took a look at system-wide what streets are being recommended for certain types of projects. So I think it's timely to have that discussion again. And we do want to take a look at having that discussion sooner rather than later because not only for the project timeline that council has discussed in order to get bidding out earlier, but in particular in the hardscrabble area, there's some wetland area that would need to be delineated yet this year before we go into plans and specifications because we need to have that information when we go into that phase of the project should it proceed. And typically we delineations need to be done before the middle of October. So we will need to be speedy on getting council the information so that we can get direction on a 2021 project.
Well, with that said, it seems like the council is totally on board with doing hardscrabble. I don't think that's going to change. Is there any way we can somehow at our September 8th meeting authorize the delineation of the wetlands? I mean, is that putting the cart before the horse, or I want to make sure that that gets done before mid-October, like you said. Any other feedback from council?
Well, this is Councilmember Molitor. I think when we had this discussion within one of the most recent meetings, the discussion was doing Stonebridge and then, or hardscrabble and then Stonebridge and I believe it was Loring. And we were looking at our projected ending balance this year in the road fund, and we were pretty close to being able to make that happen. Obviously, if we tap into MSA money, we would be able to make that happen. So I think that was the whole point of that discussion, or one of the points of that discussion. So given that, I think that this kind of brings us full circle now, and I think that brings us to, and maybe we want to do a pulse check here, but I think the idea was, yes, we want to move forward with those three. We now have, if this all works out as we plan, we would have the MSA money to do that. But then, so then the engineering begins to take place and the bid process and all that. But then I think what I was referring to, and I believe what you were talking about as well, and I think everybody, is now that that's, water under the bridge, so to speak, and I realize I'm getting way ahead here, but assuming that all goes as planned, we need to start thinking about what the next ones are after that. And, yes, there will be a discussion about overlays, that's part of it, but also the discussion about the next larger project, generally meaning a reclamation. That's where I think we want to have that discussion at the next work session if possible. That's what I'm hearing, at least.
Yes, that was kind of where I'm getting at. I just didn't want to jump ahead too fast, too quick, but we are kind of now getting down to that time crunch, especially if we're going to have to be delineating wetlands. So I think that time frame is laid out appropriately. So staff, can you tell the council then at our September 8th meeting, what would you need to bring back in order to continue to move forward with the hardscrabble, Loring, and Stonebridge projects? And could we also then bring back at our work session discussion about future projects and the overlay projects?
Madam Mayor, we could certainly bring a proposal for the hardscrabble, Stonebridge, and Loring project. and have some information available to at the September 8th work session to look at projects for 2022 and beyond, so that council can take a look at how much state aid funding you'd be willing to entertain to get reimbursed for.
Well, and with that though, at the September 8th work session, we also want to kind of look at potential overlays, because you know, I think we've been talking about that too. So, all right. Does staff need any more direction, any more comments?
No, Madam Mayor, I appreciate the council's direction on this matter.
All right, thank you.
The only thing that I'll chime in on is, if you recall from our work session tonight on budget, September 8th, whether it's the work session or the regular meeting, we're flexible as staff. But we do have scheduled to establish the preliminary budget levy that evening. So understand the immediate nature, essentially, of dealing with these road projects. So just wanted to let council know that we'll make this work however we have to do it. It could be work session, could be regular meeting for one of these topics, could be both work session if we feel like we can buzz through them. But nonetheless, we will get them both on the schedule that night. I just don't know. Don't get your heart set on work session. Could be regular meeting or vice versa.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. With that, then we'll move on to our next item on our business agenda, and that's CARES Fund discussion. Mr. Barone, I'll start with you.
Yeah, you know, and what I'm going to do right now, Mayor and Council, is, since Mr. Beatty is the one that prepared this memo, I would like to have him kind of walk you through that, and then we can have a discussion between staff and council on that. So, Ron, if you're ready.
Sure, Madam Mayor, Council. We had a discussion at the last council meeting about the expenditure of CARES funds, and it focused on whether it was permissible to expend funds for police costs. And I think that's an important thing to discuss, because there are certainly going to be costs that are obviously reimbursable. The hand sanitizers, the face masks, and those sorts of things. But as a practical matter, those are going to total a relatively small amount of money compared to the dollars that are available to the city. So if we're going to expend the funds and not have them return, then we're going to have to think about some bigger expenses. All of the costs to qualify for CARES Act expenditures have to meet a three-part test. The costs have to be necessary and due to the pandemic. They cannot have been accounted for in a budget that was adopted before March 27th, which was the date that the CARES Act was enacted. And they have to be expended within a requisite period of time, March 1st to sometime in mid-November. Everything needs to meet those tests. During the last discussion, I think I said that I thought that the expenditure for police was an exception to that. I think the better way to say that is that expending funds for police also have to meet that test, but those funds are uniquely given a presumption. Those expenditures are given a presumption under the regulations that they do in fact meet that test. I think it still makes sense for there to be documentation as to how that occurs, and I've discussed that with the staff, and the police chief is working on that for bringing back to you at a future date. So I think that's, to me, the basic way in which this matter is laid out. I think that's consistent with the view that is being taken by other cities and with other folks that I've discussed the matter with. Having said that, this is an evolving situation. There is guidance has been provided, as I pointed out in the memo, from the Department of Treasury. There's an expectation that there will be additional guidance, perhaps directly on the point that we're talking about now. It's also possible that there will be additional guidance from MMB. Perhaps the legislature will make some change in the law. The League of Minnesota Cities may provide some additional information. I'm not sure, but I think all of those are possible sources of additional guidance on this. The city does not have to make a decision at this point. We have a couple of months before we do that. What I've laid out in my memo is what I think is the best position based on the information that's available today. But as I said, this is an evolving situation. And since the city does have additional time, our suggestion is that we wait and see what additional guidance, if any, is forthcoming before the city makes a final decision. That's really all I have on the matter.
Okay. Any questions at all? I guess the only thing that I will contribute to this conversation is the issue about payroll expenses for public safety not being budgeted for in March. I don't think that any city would be able to spend their funds towards their police, and they obviously intended for cities to spend their money for police or public safety, public health, those kind of things that you see that Ron put in his report in italicized type under his introduction. It's the third paragraph down. So I'm fairly confident, barring some unforeseen additional clarification by somebody, as Ron mentioned, a number of agencies might deal with that. But if you think about it, I don't think we did, and I don't think any other city purposely did not fund their police department last year at this time as you were working on your budget for 2020 with the expectation that there would be a pandemic in March and then we could get our police funding through that. I mean, we did our jobs, council did their jobs to fund our budget last year, and the fact that the determining date that they're using is March, I don't think precludes us from using that money towards our public safety area, because no city would be able to use that money towards public safety. And I think there will be lots of cities that are going to use this money for public safety. Don't know what percent depending on what city you're in, but I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of cities that are going to use this towards public safety. So, I mean, just logically, it makes sense that public safety, public health, et cetera, are essentially qualified for these expenses, these payroll expenses, through this CARES Act.
Well, Madam Mayor, if I could follow up on Mike's comments, which I agree with. The second part of the test, again, is that the cost was not accounted for in a budget that was adopted prior to the date. And as Mike points out, given the way things work in Minnesota, where, as we just discussed, you have to adopt a preliminary budget in September and a final budget in December, then by definition, everybody had adopted a budget prior to March 27th, unless, as Mike said, you somehow, either through incompetence or clairvoyance, decided not to fund the police. I think what's important is when you look at that second test, when it says was not accounted for in a budget, that means either it wasn't in the budget at all, or the cost was in the budget, but it's being used for a substantially different purpose. And that goes to the issue that I mentioned previously about the need to document this.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. Well, I think tonight, though, we don't need to make any determination. I think
Correct.
this is more for information purposes, and I guess I would recommend that we wait, find out, get more clarity on exactly what the funds can be used for. One of the requests that I had been asked of is from, and this might be a question for Mr. Beatty, but the We Can has approached me and asked if our council would be willing to make a donation to their organization because they have seen a substantial uptick in need in our community. My comment back to them was I would bring this to the council for some discussion, and we would probably need more information from them as to how much of an increase they've seen and how many residents in Minnetrista they're serving and that type of thing, because I don't think we can just willy-nilly start doling out money to organizations. Is that, Mr. Beatty, can you weigh in? Would we even be able to dole out or give some of the funds to them? And if so, what would be the parameters around that?
Madam Mayor, I can't answer that question specifically. I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility. The rules are different for businesses and other private entities that the city wishes to share its money with, as opposed to what we've been talking about today, which is reimbursing the city for its own expenses. And so if there's interest in that kind of expenditure, I'd be happy to look into it.
Okay. All right.
This is Shannon. Else? Yes, this is Shannon. We talked about this at our last meeting, and the public safety payroll expenses don't meet either of the first two items. The city's costs were not for a substantially different use from the expected use of these funds. And further on in your memo, you state that there isn't that substantially really isn't defined, but it is defined in the dictionary, and substantially means to a great or significant extent, or for the most part. And the presumption here as well that you say that it's given a presumption, the presumption there is just not true. The presumption, they may give a presumption, but the presumption isn't true and it's not accurate. And when I asked Chief Falls at our last meeting, if any of our public safety personnel had been substantially dedicated to COVID-19 activities, he said no. So I do not support using the CRF funds for public safety payroll because it doesn't meet the requirements, and the city could be asked to reimburse that money later if somebody finds out that we used it for non-COVID valid things. And this money was intended for COVID-related purposes, not to just pay off our payroll, our public safety payroll. And I think it's dishonest to try and figure out a way just to keep this money when the other cities are giving the money back. Mound returned part of their money because they didn't have a lot of valid COVID-19 expenses. So there's a foregone conclusion that we have to spend this money, and that's not true. Plus, I think there are other valid uses for the money that if we wait until November to decide what to do with it, then all of our options are going to be gone. And the only thing that we'll be able to use this money on is public safety. If that's the plan, then I'm not on board with that either. I think there are things that we could do with our IT infrastructure, with our remote access, making it easier for parents that are working at home and children taking online courses at school to get better internet access. I think there's a lot of COVID-19 related valid reasons that we could use this money for instead of public safety that is not related to COVID-19.
So just a comment. I just recently, just a few days ago, actually last week, spoke with Mayor Salazar, and he didn't indicate that they've given the money back or that they're going to give the money back. So, I mean, just for clarification, they've actually created a committee to try and figure out what they can and where they should be spending the money. Having said that,
it was in the Laker. I read it in the Laker.
Yeah, I spoke to him like a few days ago. So, all right.
Madam Mayor?
With that, yes.
This is Chief Halls. Just for a point of clarification, if I could just make one clarification. At the last meeting, I was asked about whether or not the police department was substantially dedicated to COVID-19. And so just to be perfectly clear, I don't remember my exact words, but I don't believe I gave a hard no that we're not. First of all, that definition, they didn't define that definition. I was uncomfortable answering that question, and so I believe what my intent was to say that if I had to say that all of our staff as a whole was substantially dedicated 100% at that moment, I probably would err on the side of being cautious and say no. That was the intent of my comment. With that said, I think it's very, very clear that I absolutely believe I have been 100% substantially dedicated, at least for the first couple of months since this started. My job has changed 180 degrees in nothing but review and preparation. And what started out as daily meetings, I still have weekly meetings, several of them dedicated solely to COVID-19. So I just want to be clear that staff is all being very cautious about this. Nobody wants to spend money that we don't deserve or that is for the wrong purpose. That's why we're taking this approach. And so I just want to clarify that there's still a lot of information that's coming out as people have more questions, and there's going to be further clarification. So it makes sense not to make any final decisions at this point. But for the record, I don't want to answer that we are not dedicated to COVID-19 as a public safety department, because certainly we are. To what extent, that's what I guess we'll have to see.
Actually, Chief Falls, when I asked you the question, I actually wrote down your comment, and you can listen to it back on the audio, but your quote was, if I had to prove that, no, is what you said. And when you said that your time is being spent predominantly on COVID-19 activities, that's one person. We've got 13. And so if you have valid time that you've done that, then that's great if it's documented. But as a city council, all of us have to, this is our decision, and we're all sitting here saying that we're spending these funds on valid COVID-19 related activities. And I'm not comfortable doing that with the public safety payroll, just lumping it all together and just saying we're presuming that they did, when I would like to see documentation about it, because I don't think any exists.
Okay. Anybody else want to?
Bruce, I completely agree with that concern. I'm not, and that's why I was uncomfortable saying that, 100% every staff member here is substantially dedicated. Part of the problem is they didn't define that. And the second piece is, I was kind of answering for me, and certainly I have been, at least for a portion of that time. But I share your concern. We're certainly not just going to throw a blanket over it and move forward. That's why we're dissecting this and waiting for more direction. So your point is well taken.
Thank you, Mr. Falls, Chief Falls. Mr. Beatty, I have a question. So I think there might be two issues that you might have to research. One, are we allowed to give some of these CRF funds to an organization like, let's say, the local food shelf, or we can? Should there be a need due to COVID? And then the other question, Ms. Bruce mentioned, providing better internet to our residents. Is that a legitimate expense that you can use the relief funds for as well? I think we'd have to find out exactly what the funds can be and cannot be used for.
Well, Yeah, Madam Mayor, I will take a look at the first question as we discussed before. You know, there are any number of potential expenditures that are possible, but the test that I outlined originally is the test that all of them would have to pass. The difference is that none of those other expenditures enjoy the presumption that police expenditures do.
Okay. So you'd have to prove in some manner that
Well,
these other expenditures
yeah,
are
yeah.
caused or additional.
In other words, if there was some other expenditure for software or anything else, you know, which may well be legitimate, you'd have to be able to show that it was necessary due to COVID-19, that it wasn't accounted for in a previous budget, and that it was spent within the requisite period of time. And so again, that's the standard test that everything has to meet, but those other expenditures would not enjoy the presumption that the police costs do.
But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Bruce, but I think what Ms. Bruce is saying is do something with the funds that would help our residents, not the city, but our residents enjoy better internet access and or reliability. Is that, Ms. Bruce, what you're kind of saying?
It's more than that. I think it's, I outlined in the paper that I gave to the council at our last meeting some ideas, and certainly looking at internet access and encouraging service providers to come here and increasing our high-speed internet to all of our residents. That's a big deal, and it is going to require significant costs to be expended in order to do that. And yeah, that's one of the things I would like to do, but I just lost my train of thought. But I would much rather spend the money on internet access and helping people through this time where they're all at home and their kids are trying to go to school online and parents are working from home and their bandwidth is just gone because and it's not just the download speed, it's the upload speed. When you start having to upload your assignments to a school site, that brings your whole house to a crawl. I had a friend that told me that she lost $2,000 in a trade this morning because her internet crashed and she was trading online. She does stock trading in the mornings. And I don't think people that don't live here understand the pain of the community and that this COVID-19 stuff has caused. And I don't want to see this money just spent on something that isn't related. This money came to us to help people in our community, not to pay off our public safety payroll. And I think we ought to get a little more creative and think about how we can help the people in our community more. And I just don't want to wait until November until all of our options are gone and the only thing that's left we have time to do is write a check to pay off our payroll.
Well,
Mayor, can I
jump
in here, if you don't mind?
Yeah, just a second. So
Okay.
A couple things. We do have something coming up, not only next, I think it's, we're hoping in September to bring forth some internet options, or not options, but discussion. And then, you know, I think, and then we're also later on in this meeting, we're talking about technology needs for the city itself. But I think more importantly, before we even go down, and I don't disagree that we want to help our residents. I mean, that's one of the reasons I brought the weekend and food shelf issue to the forefront. But the question here, again, would be, what can we do technologically to help our residents with this money? Is that even an option? So we need to answer that question, I think, first before we can even decide how to spend the money. So, Mr. Baroni?
Yes, Mayor. Just to talk a little bit about the CARES money and related to technology. The assumption that I've been under is that this money can be spent on something directly related to COVID. And as an example, we've had a number of people that are still working from home quite a bit of time. The number of city hall people are also working, kind of a 50-50, sometimes more than that at the office. But the technology requests would be to help our employees with another laptop computer. I know we got a couple of phones for people so they didn't have to use personal phones from work because they're in the customer service or they get a lot of contact with the public. Additional VPNs, things of that nature. That's what I understand the technology is used for. The need for better internet has been an ongoing need for many, many years here. It's just been exacerbated by COVID, but that need existed long before COVID arrived here. So I don't know. I think I think it's a stretch to say just because Billy or Sally can't get their homework done quickly uploaded to their assignment, that's our issue because of COVID. I know they're home and learning remotely, but that issue, people weren't able to upload their homework before COVID. It has really nothing to do with, in my eyes, the internet. The internet and the dollars for technology were, like I described earlier, it was just to help staff work better remotely, better connectivity remotely. I guess you can, try to stretch it and say that, getting better internet access for our residents is a direct result of COVID. I'm not sure it is. And so one of the reasons, and we'll talk about this upcoming, we got an item on our IT needs. One of the things I mentioned in that report, which we'll get to, is Bob Bose from Kennedy and Graven, who not only performs duties as a city attorney like Mr. Beatty does, but his background is in technology. And so I want to have him here in September, one of the September meetings. His issue, as I described, is he has another commitment on those same exact nights that we meet, so he'd have to switch or bail out of his whatever city it is. So I've not heard back from him. I contacted him last week. I don't know if he's on vacation or whatever, but nonetheless, I think he would be a great resource to give us as a city some potential options about how to pursue better internet access versus trying to rely on any COVID money to do so. I think I brought this up. I'm trying to think of the time frame. It was while I think Cassandra Tabor was here, but before Allie was hired. And I did have a conversation. I think I relayed my conversation to the council at a meeting that we would, once our new director of administration gets hired, we'd like to have Bob Bose out here. And this again was before COVID. So I think that would greatly educate the council on what is and what isn't real as far as potential ways to increase our internet capacity here in Minnetrista, because I know it's not good. It's not like I don't agree with that. I know it's not good, but which is one reason why we use, our conversations on Mondays with audio only. So that's my take on that. I'm not sure that saying that better internet access is a real answer and the payroll for PD isn't. I'm kind of of the opposite opinion on that.
Well, we all have our opinions, but I have read a good portion of the CARES Act, and the CARES Act was not designed to provide relief to local governments. It was designed to provide relief for residents that have been impacted by COVID-19. That's the purpose of the CARES Act. And saying that it only applies to technology for the city is, I would ask you to go read the legislation, because I think you've misinterpreted it.
Okay. Rest of the council, Mr. Molitor, you want to weigh in at all?
Well, first of all, when we say government versus citizens, I really, that it's one of those things that after being on the council for 4 years, really just drives me nuts, to be honest with you. Let's not forget that government is citizens and citizens are government in this country. So this us versus them is not an appropriate part of this discussion. So I think that's important. The other thing is we all agree about the internet service. I lost my internet service this morning while trying to work, but to Mr. Baroni's point, that's been there for a long time. And we're now 6 months into the pandemic, and to write the first check out for any kind of technology would probably be at least a month or 2 or 3 away. It'd be really hard for me to say, oh, that was COVID-19 and we spent the first dime in October. That's pretty hard for me to say, yeah, that's true. No, I think given the fact that we've been paying for our police services back when this originally started, I think that's a valid request. And finally, we can go back and forth about this all night, and I'm sure we will. But I think at the end of the day, we all know that if we don't allocate this money for use within the city, it's going to go to somewhere else, some other city. It's not like the residents are going to get a check back. And so if we don't agree to use this money within the city, as allowed by the law, under the presumptions as Mr. Beatty described, we are doing a great disservice to our residents. And I can't support that. So I think we can discuss this, but we need to come to a conclusion. It doesn't have to be tonight, but to not take what is our fair share is an absolute disservice to the residents. So that's all I have. Thank you.
And I agree with everything. I agree with that. I'm not saying we shouldn't use this money. I'm saying we should use it for the best purpose that we can come up with. And maybe we're not going to decide on that tonight, but
no, we don't need to make that decision tonight. I think we'll get more clarity on what it can be used for and what it can't. And again, as Mr. Beatty pointed out in his memo, this isn't a decision that we have to make tonight. So I don't want to belabor this. It is getting on 9 o'clock, and we still have a couple of items to discuss. So anybody else want to weigh in? Otherwise, we'll move it along. Mr. Trumperlin?
Yeah, one thing, it's a minor point, but Mr. Grimm, I had questioned you or emailed you yesterday, I think. Do we have a total for the items that we know at this stage that we spent for the cleaners and the working the lobby and any other costs that we know are slam dunks that would be reported as costs incurred that weren't in the budget that are being incurred because of the COVID? What's that number today? Do we know?
I believe it was a little over 5,000, like 5,200. There might be a few other things we can add to it, but it's pretty small in the grand scheme of things. Whether it's a percent or two of our total eligible amount, it's really small as far as the sanitizer, the real hard costs that you could pin through cutting invoice checks for or whatever. So
are we saying?
Well, the other thing.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, John. No, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, from a reporting perspective, then, irregardless of what we end up allocating the big number to, because we know we're not going to spend $500,000 with masks, etc. But if and when we do the reporting, would we plan on reporting those types of things that need substantiated reports, as Mr. Beatty has alluded to, and then drop in this other number that, and again, we don't know what that's going to be, but if we put these small items in, do they all have to be itemized out?
No, the way the report's set up, they have like block categories. Like one of them's like payroll expenses for public safety. There's like supplies. So they've even said they don't want to be looking at line items and individual checks and expenditures. They want to see it by grouping or function, basically. So there's that half a dozen categories or something that you can choose from, and they want you to group that way. So,
and if I can jump in here, so based on the email request we got from Councilmember Shumperlin, and then also based on my conversation I had this morning with Councilmember Bruce, I emailed all of our city staff, department directors, and city clerk to try to put together a list of all those eligible expenses. As Mr. Grimm just said, you know, it's probably not going to amount to a large dollar amount, but I think what we can do, council, is put that and submit that to, since they are eligible. And as Mr. Grimm said, it's a pretty basic form. I mean, you just categorize it. I think the record keeping will be on our end in case there's ever some sort of audit on this, and whatever we submit, we should have a record of, kind of thing. But I think we can, you know, at our next report, I guess it would be the August report that would be due in early September. We can probably submit that, and you know, we'll obviously include that in the packet when we get to September 8th if it's ready for them. But you know, I think these are legit, as Mr. Chumperland called them, slam dunks kind of thing. So I think we can do that. But again, I don't think it's going to be a lot.
Mr. Brony, don't forget, I think a really valid one is that we've kind of not really talked about it, and Paul brought this, Chief Falls brought this up early on. He was going to daily meetings regarding this, and he was putting in pretty much 100% of his time because of the COVID. And I think that, and then not only that, but the time away from his office that he wasn't able to dedicate to routine things probably had to be passed on to the lieutenant, and maybe even some of it to the sergeants. So that has to be taken into consideration, and that should be part of that, those dollar amounts, because those are absolutely legitimate legal expenses. He would not have been going to those meetings and taking up all of his time for the COVID had it not been for COVID. So that's something to consider as well.
Absolutely, I agree.
And Madam, go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is Ron Beatty again. All I was going to say is I agree with all that. I think we should certainly pay for these slam dunk things, even though they won't amount to a lot of money. As several people have said, staff is taking this very seriously. It is significant that there is a presumption. I don't want to lose track of that, but we have continuously spoken among ourselves about the need to document this to the degree that we can. The police chief is going to do that, and we're going to bring that back to the council, because every expenditure that you are asked to verify is going to have to pass the same test. Do you believe that it passes these 3 tests? And whether that's the police cost or anything else we come up with, you will ultimately, you the council collectively will ultimately be asked to say that yes, you believe it meets that test.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Trumperlin, anything else?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Right. And Ms. Mortensen, did you want to make any comments?
I just want to say I think we all need clarity on how this money, you know, what we just have all talked about. But I'm hoping that cities are putting heat to get that clarity, because it's putting the council into a very tough situation. We're all in budget mode right now, and this plays a part into some of that. So we need some answers and some clarity quickly, so that we aren't down to the final hour to make the decision on whether we keep the money. And regarding keeping the money, Mike's point about if we don't use it, it's going someplace else, I could have sworn I saw that it could go back to the county. That would mean that money would go back to Hennepin County. And I don't think a lot of people in the city of Minnetrista would appreciate that.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
Money would actually go back to, Hennepin, one of the medical or hospitals or something to that effect. But yeah, it would be basically another entity, you know, at the county level or wouldn't be us, which I think would be, I think there's a lot of needs, whether it's police expenditures or technology. I don't think it has to be an either or. I think there's a lot of different potential needs we can use it for in the city.
In Ramsey and Hennepin counties, it will go, as Brian said, to one of the hospitals.
All right. Okay. Having said that, again, we're not going to make a decision on this tonight, so we're going to move on to our local emergency order discussion. And who wants to take that?
That's probably me again.
All right.
Madam Mayor, yeah. I put together a memo which I thought might give some context to the way the local emergency works, specifically in terms of who is authorized to do what. The local emergency invokes both state law and the city's local ordinance, which is somewhat dated. It was included in your packet. You see it's called civil defense, which is probably an indication of its age. It's probably, you know, from Cold War sort of days, but it does lay out the jobs of various entities. I thought that was a useful document just so that everyone kind of understood what is it that the council can do, what is it that the mayor can do, what is it that the emergency director, which is the police chief, can do. So, and I think that document is somewhat self-explanatory. Other than that, I don't have a lot to add. We've talked about this on a number of occasions. I don't want to repeat all of that. Staff's recommendation was and continues to be to leave the local emergency order in place because I see it as an insurance policy. If we never use it, that's fine, but it's there in case we do need it. I see no tangible harm with keeping it in place, but ultimately it's a decision that the council has to make, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. Anybody else have questions of Mr. Beatty? I think what thing came to mind or was kind of interesting is that the city of Minnetrista has an ordinance in place, and specifically spells out who has authorization to do what. And most of the responsibility lies within the director, the emergency management director's position. So Paul is really the one in charge of expenditures and deciding what needs to be done at what time, not the mayor, which is good because I certainly wouldn't want that responsibility. But anybody else have questions or comments?
Yes, I do. This is Shannon. First of all, an emergency order was never meant to be an indefinite thing. And if you look up emergency in the dictionary, it says a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. Immediate action. And the fact that this order has been in place for 5 months without not a single one of its measures being used makes it clear this order is unnecessary and should be terminated. And when Mr. Beatty indicates there isn't any tangible harm, I believe there is, because when a city invokes emergency orders and keeps them in place long after they've been proven unnecessary, it breeds contempt for policymakers and our local government. There's absolutely no reason we need to continue this emergency order. Emergency orders were never designed to be invoked or continued, for that matter, for the uncertainties of the future or because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, if that were the case, we'd be under perpetual emergency orders until the end of time. And I'd like to make a motion to terminate the emergency order effective immediately.
Okay, a motion has been made by Ms. Bruce. Is there a second?
This is Councilmember Molitor. I'll second that motion. And
okay.
May I add comment or okay?
Absolutely.
In doing that, that is not. I want to make sure I'm very clear. I'm not insinuating anything has been done wrong by either you, Mayor Whalen, or police chief, Mr. Pauls, or anybody else. I think everyone's handled this extremely well. But A couple of things. I mean, I do believe Shannon has some points there that it's not intended to be indefinite. And also, just from a practical matter, we have spent so much of the council's and staff's time on this subject that it's costing us a lot of time and money in discussing this. Not that things shouldn't be discussed, but given that this can be reinstated at any point if necessary at the mayor's request and then supported by the council, I think it would behoove us all to consider removing the order and then placing it in at a future point if necessary. Again, that's not a statement against anybody. I think it's been handled very well across the board by everyone. But I think it would behoove us to allow the council to focus on other issues that are more pressing, quite frankly, at this point. So I just want to give that background. I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of anybody, but that's the reason why I'm seconding the motion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Molitor. Mr. Trumperlin or Ms. Mortensen?
This is John T. I do have a couple of questions. If we terminate it, I know it can be reinstated. If it is a true emergency, the reinstatement of it then becomes, to me, more of a, well, we can't wait for 2 weeks from next Monday to do it, so what do we do? What's the legal process? Do we call an emergency meeting and have a quorum and decide to re-invoke it, or what's the process?
Yes, it could only be reinstated for 3 days, and then after that, we would have to have an emergency meeting. So if the council wanted to extend it. And so probably what would happen is I would have to call the emergency order, and at the same time, we would then have to decide within 3 days when we can have at least a majority of the council attend an emergency meeting. But Mr. Beatty, can you quickly weigh in on that?
Madam Mayor, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay,
So it may require an emergency meeting. Yep. Go ahead.
And second question, Chief Falls, and not to put you on the spot, but obviously there has been no emergency, at least none that we're aware of. What can one speculate could meet that criteria? What is, all the cities around here are probably still in the same boat, and probably none of them have had to use those powers. But what do you envision now with the being 4, 5, 6 months into this and what your meetings you're attending? What could be a possibility that would happen in Minnetrista that would need this action?
Councilmember Trumperlin, that's a good question. The bottom line is this is an unprecedented situation. None of us, including many of the experts that have been in this field even longer than I have ever seen anything like this. And so the reason for the emergency order is, as has been stated many, many times, is just to allow us to take swift action if we need to do that. Fortunately, because staff does take this very, very seriously, we have not had to do that. We are watching every penny, and we're doing everything we can to operate as normally as possible. However, without, I guess, rehashing this entire conversation from the past, the biggest area or threat, I guess, in our case, would be staffing. If we started to see illness, and in places where they have seen it, it typically spreads very quickly, and you are down several staff members. Well, we can't operate that way. If I lose 3 or 4 patrol officers, we're going to have to get some help from somewhere else. Or if that were to happen in another agency, we would have to go assist them. And so we have an overtime budget, but we would very quickly exceed that, probably within a 2-week period. It could even be less time than that, depending on the amount of staff needed. That's the best example I can think of. Another example would be something along the lines of having to decontaminate entire facilities, things like that that could be costly. You might have to call in cleaners, specialized trained cleaners for that purpose, and that can be expensive as well. So those are just a couple examples off the top of my head. I will share that while I understand all of your concerns, I have the same concerns. I can tell you that all of the cities, or I should say law enforcement agencies or partners within the Lake Area Emergency Management Group, are still under the emergency orders. And to the point that the city attorney mentioned, really the reason they're doing that is it puts them in the best position to be able to respond to an emergency. And yes, I know that this might not fit everyone's definition of an emergency. The bottom line is we've never seen this before. And there's a lot of upcoming things like potentially kids going back to school, things like that, that could drastically change the projections that we're seeing right now. And we are still seeing new cases, new deaths, new hospitalizations, all those things. So with that said, all of those cities are continuing the emergency order. It just puts us in the best position to respond quickly if needed. And the council is going to be kept up to date on any significant changes as you have been up to this point. So from that standpoint, I hope I can ease your fears that way. Not that we're not going to do anything secretly or otherwise. We're just going to continue until we have more data and we feel that as a group, the Lake Minnetonka Area Group, that this threat has passed enough where we don't need these measures in place. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I appreciate that detail. Thank you.
Ms. Mortensen, any questions or comments?
John, your questions are really good, as well as all the other comments. But one of the main reasons that I did vote originally for was the financial aspect of it, that we would, if we did have additional expenses, would get reimbursed. But that's not really the case now, correct? If we were taking off the emergency status, we would still be able to make the claims for any costs that we've incurred for COVID, correct?
Who would
Given the money's
that?
already in our account, I would say yes.
That is correct.
Well, that's, yeah. So are there any, or have you heard of any FEMA dollars becoming available? Because that, I think, is what originally we were thinking about, that if you are under an emergency order, FEMA dollars would be coming your way easier or more, if not, I don't want to say guaranteed, but now if that's off the table, are FEMA dollars off the table? I guess that would be the question.
Right.
Madam Mayor, members of council, that's a good question. And the bottom line is if you use CARES money for the expenses related to COVID-19, then you would not be able to submit anything to FEMA. So FEMA was the original avenue they were going to use to try and address some of these expenses. And then after this went on for a period of time, the CARES Act money became available. So FEMA, there are some cases where you could use both because some expenses might be eligible under one but not the other. But that would be more applicable to very large cities that have very complex issues related to COVID-19, and that doesn't really apply to us here.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think I stated this a month ago. I'm not a fan of an open end date. And I think it is, I personally think the threat has somewhat passed. And if we do end it, and the possibility that, or the fact that we could reinstate it quite quickly, if need be, I'd like to see it end as well and then reenact it if need be at that time.
Okay. All right. So any other comments? Otherwise, a motion has been made by Ms. Bruce and seconded by Mr. Molitor to end the emergency status. And I don't recall, Ms. Bruce, did you say immediately or tomorrow or?
I said immediately.
Okay. And then Mr. Beatty or Mr. Brony, is there anything else? So it sounds like this will pass. I'll take the vote in just a second here. But do we need to post it then or do anything? Should it be ended?
Well, Madam Mayor, this is Ron Beatty. My suggestion would be that you actually direct us to bring back a resolution to that effect. I don't know that that's required, but since the emergency order was put in place by resolution, I think the appropriate way to get rid of it is through resolution.
Okay, so a motion and a second is not a resolution then?
Madam Mayor, I think this is a decision for the council to make, and I don't see any reason that we need a resolution to terminate a previous resolution. I think all we need is a motion, and the motion, if it passes by a quorum of the council, will be effective.
I understand, but my question was maybe simply a motion and a second is indeed a resolution. That was my question.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
This is Chris. By just making a motion and a second does not constitute a resolution.
Okay. So it wouldn't be a resolution.
I'm sorry, it would just be, it would just be, there's other things that you have voted on before without resolutions. You know, if we don't need a resolution, if Ron says we do or don't need one, then, I mean, I would take the advice of our attorney regarding having a resolution or not, but by just motioning is not a resolution.
All right, thank you. And Ron, you said we wouldn't necessarily need one, but simply because we made a resolution?
Madam Mayor, I don't think it's required. I think you can modify it tonight. I just think the easier way to track it and the more professional way would be to draft a resolution or direct us to draft a resolution. But if the council wishes to do it by motion tonight, I think you have the right to do that.
Okay. All right.
How about a suggestion to modify the motion to reference the original resolution number and just make the motion to terminate the emergency order and the resolution number, whatever that number was? Ms. Lindquist, does that make sense?
Well, I think in effect that is what you're doing. I think the motion, even though you didn't specify quite this way, is to revoke the emergency order that was enacted by resolution, whatever it is. Again, as the city clerk says, that's a motion. That's not a resolution, but that will do it.
Okay.
Madam Mayor and Council, if I could chime in here, David here, I mean, this is very similar to what we did earlier tonight with the PUD adjustment. I guess the suggestion I would have is go ahead, you have a motion and a vote. What we could do as staff, if we want to solidify it with the resolution, is we would bring that back at your next meeting under the consent agenda. You're in all intents purposes, you're ending the emergency order tonight. It's just a follow-up bookkeeping tracking document that we'd bring back under consent, solidifying what you've done tonight, if that's an option worth exploring.
Yeah, I think that would be a good option. Like
I
you
agree.
said, then there's way to track it and way to keep track of it. So, all right. So so the motion has been made and seconded. So all those in favor will signify with aye, and I'll go down the road. Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
Mr. Trumperlin?
Aye.
And I'm Lisa Whalen. I vote aye. Motion passes 5-0. We'll bring this back under consent agenda items as a resolution, making the effective date effective. I don't know if you need a time, but it really can't be the entire day, but 17th of August, I guess, or immediately. All right. With that, then, we move on to our future city information technology needs and discussion. Mr. Brony.
Yes, Mayor and Council, I've touched on this a little earlier, but I will spend just a minute or two. I'm sure everybody's had a chance to read through this. So Ms. Bruce brought up something in an email to council members back in early August, and it was initially, I think, to deal with internet access, as she's brought up again tonight on utilizing CARES funding. But that opened the door for me to contemplate, what have we been doing here for a strategic plan, I guess, lack of a better phrase, for our IT situation. I'm happy with Loeffler. They've done a pretty good job over the years. We do meet periodically to have strategy sessions and kind of lay out kind of where we're going, next steps. But, since I've been here since late 2009, we have not taken a fresh look at this. I'd be happy to take a look at that. I'm not beholden to Loeffler. Like I said, I've been fine with what they're doing, but there's a lot of people out there a lot of companies out there that could meet our IT needs. So in order to start this out, I did reach out to Melanie Reeder. She goes by Mel, so if you hear me say Mel, that's her. But she's the CIO for the League of Minnesota Cities. And, since we have not done this before, I asked her if she could give me some information related to taking a fresh look at IT services. So those questions that you see on the second page of my memo are the ones that she provided for me, in addition to some of the things that I added in there that have to do with particularly related to our city. And then I took an opportunity to speak with each of the department directors to try to get a better idea of what we currently use for technology, whether that's something that we purchased and use on site and store it on our own server, or as you can see in a lot of things, it could be hosted off site or it's in the cloud already. And I won't say that this is a complete list, but this is probably fairly close. The first suggestion, so I won't go through all the software and things of that nature that we use to do our jobs. I'll just touch on the workstations. As I said, we have 37 employees, but we have way more workstations. I gave you a rough idea on why we have additional workstations. Some are based on functions that need to be done. And so I listed a couple of examples. Then I also touched on the internet, which I think is a similar but a separate conversation that I think it would be important to have. And so the only thing I'm really asking for tonight is to reach out to Loeffler. I have not done that yet, to see how much it would cost, because it's not in our contract. It'd be a good guess that it's not in our contract, to try to come up with an inventory, with a complete IT inventory, hardware, software, versions of software, viability of the software is long-term, short-term. They understand our system better than anybody right now. That doesn't mean they got an inside lane to getting this job, but they obviously would be able to provide us right now with a accurate description of our current IT status citywide. That would give us a chance to then go out and try to find a vendor, which would be the second step, if the council is ready to do something like that, and try to see what it would take to become better IT with a better IT placement here for not only now but in the future. That would be the idea of this. Touching on the internet service, I know that Ms. Bruce has talked about that a couple of times tonight, and as I've agreed, I said I know we have not the greatest internet service here, and I know people have been dissatisfied with MediaCom, but I want to say February, March, I did have a chance to talk with Mr. Vose. This is before Ms. Polfus came on board. And I'd like to have him out, hopefully in September, to kind of explain and I called it the state of affairs with telecommunications. As he described for me in that phone call, and I think we spent 30 minutes kind of talking about stuff, our city, as well as many, many, many other cities, not only in Minnesota, but other places across this nation, are kind of in the same boat. especially if you're located like we are, kind of on the edge of a metro area. Maybe not so much if you're out in the rural areas, because there are some ways to overcome those deficiencies with grants, et cetera. But when you're on the edge of, I wouldn't say civilization, but when you're on the edge of a metro area like we are, we don't really have the greatest internet service. And this goes back to what he told me, to the 70s and 80s, when all this legislation was being written federally on how these telecommunication companies, which have very deep pockets and have been in business for many years, operate in this country. And at the city, we're kind of stuck, like a lot of places are, with not having a lot of leverage in dealing with companies like Mediacom, or pick your telecommunications company and wherever you live.
Maricopa County's seeing some issues. Hi, Matt.
Yeah. But Mr. Brony, I think
Yes.
We can wait and hear all of this from Mr. Voss, and also probably everything else that he has to add to it, along with all of our questions. So I don't want to get dig too deep or dive too deep into that tonight. I know he's very well versed in this, and I too have spoken with him about it as well. And this was several months ago. So anyhow, go ahead.
So no, I just wanted to say that's kind of my two-step approach: get an overall assessment of our services and that our IT picture here, and then hopefully in the next couple of meetings we can have Mr. Vos kind of give us an update on possibilities related to better internet in the city of Minnetrista. And then if the council still has an appetite for looking at a IT plan for the future, we could I could talk with Ms. Reeder and try to find out some additional information on how to put together an RFP, et cetera. So I stand for any feedback from any of the council members. I'd be.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Bruce, this is kind of your request. Is this what you had in mind?
I just want to thank Mr. Brony for putting the work into this, because it's obvious you did a lot of work. And I agree. A first step, having Loeffler do an inventory of everything that we use is a great first step. And I look forward to hearing from Mr. Voss too. An additional thing that I'd like to suggest, and I think having a citizens technology advisory committee of local experts that are experts in the field of server networks, enterprise cloud offerings, and broadband, whether it's satellite, cable, DSL, fiber, 5G. All of that expertise is really hard to come by in a single person. And I think we could benefit by putting together a TAC, a technical advisory committee, that, because I know people in Minnetrista that are not even retired yet, but some people that are actively working in those fields that would be more than happy to sit down and just give some of their time to the city to serve their community. And I've got a list of names that I could provide to you, people that don't have any financial interest in the recommendations that they would give to the city, but I think that might be an additional step to take to really make sure that we're making the best decisions that we should. But I just wanted to thank you for putting this together. I think you did a great job.
Appreciate it. Like I said, we've had a plan, but I would really call it a complete plan. And I think after being here 11 years, I think the city could benefit from really taking a good hard look at where we're going IT-wise, to set ourselves up for the future. There could be some dollars obviously involved, and that was included in some of the questions on how you want to do it. But whether it's citizens or a vendor or some combination thereof working together, I think that there could be some possibilities there of trying to accomplish this.
Well, I think the first step would be to do the, so you said the first step it's almost two different things. One is looking at the City Hall technology. Two is looking at technology, broadband, whatever for the entire community. So I think those are actually two different issues or two different things. It seems like there's a first step for the city hall technology, and that would be to have Loeffler put together this list of what we have, inventory, and then we're going to have Voss in sometime in September, and let's listen to what he has to say, and then I think the council can then take the next step and decide where we want to go with this, and do we want a committee? What is that going to look like? What would their job be versus the council looking at it? And so I think that needs to be another discussion. But I'd like to get some of the things rolling, such as city hall technology, that list or inventory, and then have Bob Voss come in and talk to the council. I think those are the first two steps, and then we can talk about the third step and the fourth step after that. Is the council on board? Is the council on board with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Great. All right. Now, having said that, if Loeffler says to do the inventory is going to be more than the 2,500, do we want to authorize? Do you want to come back, or do we want to authorize a certain amount?
Well, having not done this before, I have no idea what it's going to cost. But hopefully they'll understand and recognize our relationship over the years, and we'll want to do this hopefully for a value-added price. We'll see.
Okay.
But, I don't have any way of knowing exactly what this was going to cost. I did not get a chance to ask that of Ms. Reeder. So, but she did suggest that our current vendor would probably be the place to start. So.
All right. So start with them and see what they say, and then you can bring this back at the September 8th meeting, and then also talk to Mr. Voss and see either the 8th or the next meeting, preferably sooner than later, but see what he says.
Correct.
All right. Okay, great. We'll move on to staff reports. Mr. Brony, do you have any staff reports?
Just a couple of items, Mayor and Council. So as you know, our next council meeting is until Tuesday, September 8th. That's 3 weeks from tomorrow. This is our last more than 2-week gap that we have between now and I guess the end of October, early November. A couple other items did include in your info packet the update from our August 11th water tower construction project meeting. Just to quickly recap, they poured the foundation and they're putting foundation walls in place, and they're starting to work on the shaft, and that's the work that they've been doing. We'll meet again in roughly a month or 3 weeks from now. Then the final item is both City Clerk Chris Lindquist and I delivered a City Council candidate info meeting virtually last Wednesday, which was the 12th at 3 p.m. for all the candidates that have filed for office and that were interested in hearing that. So we put together a PowerPoint that we shared with them, and I think it went well. So with that, Mayor, I am done with any items that I have for tonight.
Did you want to report anything on the fire district meeting?
I was going to let that go with you. I heard Miss Bruce. I think we were talking about the fire meeting last time, and I stole her thunder. I don't feel like stealing any more thunder, whether it's you or her. So I'll let you guys discuss the fire meeting.
All right. Then we have a Director of Public Safety, Paul. Do you have anything?
Yes, real quick, Madam Mayor, members of council. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. Some of the staff is, but we had a resident. It's actually a Mound resident that lives on Dutch Lake, which is, as you know, in both the city of Mound and the city of Minnetrista. He made an application to the Hennepin County Sheriff's Water Patrol to set up a water ski course on Dutch Lake. And part of the county's application process requires that all of the affected cities give essentially written permission so that the Water Patrol can process the application. With that said, I had a conversation with the deputy in charge of this particular application. He has no concerns about this course being set up on the lake. And that would be my first question. From my perspective, I don't have any concern. If Water Patrol is okay with it, they're the experts, then I would be okay with it. But unfortunately, the application does require written permission from each city. So with that, I guess I would like to find out if the council is okay with that. And if they are, then we'll have to determine what exactly constitutes written permission and get that to Water Patrol.
Well, so Chief Falls, a couple questions. Do you know how many acres is that lake?
I do not have that information. It is relatively small.
Yeah, I know. And do you know what
Probably
the
100.
longest 100 acres? Gosh, and then what is the longest length on the lake?
I have no idea.
Do we know that?
No.
Because I know you need a relatively long length for water skiing. And then have we talked to any of the Minnetrista residents that actually live on the lake or own property on the lake?
No, that's not something that we would do. That's something that Water Patrol would do, but it is part of their process. So they will contact property owners on the lake as well as part of the application process. They just haven't gone that far because they need permission from the written permission from the two cities to even proceed.
Okay, and then do we know like how often they would be in? What is this for? Just to water ski or to practice water skiing? I mean, what's the use of this? I guess that would be my question.
Madam Mayor, my understanding is that this will be used to practice various water skiing techniques that will be set up in the lake in a manner that is allowed if it's approved. And that's about all the information I have. Again, Water Patrol is the expert in this area, so I would refer those decisions to them.
So Mayor and Council, I'm not an avid water skier or anything, but when I worked at the City of Eden Prairie, there was a request similar to this. And from what I understand, it's basically some slalom cones that they either kind of fall in two categories, some that are jumps and some that are slalom cones. And they're submergible. So they're at the bottom of the lake and then somebody activates it and the slalom cones pop up out of the lake when whoever out there wants to slalom around the cones, and then they go back down when they're done. So unless it's a ramp, I don't know if they're doing jumping, but those are usually the two things that are put out there, and they're marked so boats don't pile into them when they're out fishing or whatever.
Right, Madam Mayor and Council, I will point out that this is not a common request for us here in Minnetrista because permanent courses, water ski courses, are not allowed on Lake Minnetonka. However, temporary courses are. So you can put up a temporary course on Lake Minnetonka, but there's no permit required for that process. So people do this fairly routinely in our area, and it's taken down at the end of the day, and that's the end of it. So that's why we don't hear a lot about this type of activity. But Water Patrol has a process, and they do verify it and check on it. So.
It would seem like you need to ask the residents for their input first before the council makes a decision. Because, I mean, how else, I mean, you know, I guess I'd want to find, you know.
If I may, the way I understood the process here is that we would be giving consent for the Water Patrol to proceed, and then the Water Patrol would handle that part of it. And so, I mean, I certainly agree. I'd want to have some at least notification, if not, you know, to the homeowners. But if the Water Patrol takes care of that, and they just need our permission to proceed with that, then I guess, you know, that's how the process works, and it seems to make sense.
But my question, Mr. Molitor, is, so we give our consent. Now they go out and talk to the property owners, and then the property owners say, we don't want that. I mean, we don't want that on our quiet lake, constant, you know, fast. I mean, you have to go really fast. And I mean, you have to do at least 35 miles an hour in order to get somebody up out of the water and for competitive skiing, you're looking at 35 to 40 mile an hour boats on that little lake. So my question is, if we give our consent and then they go to the property owners and they go, we don't want that, does that mean that it's automatically nixed? Or have we already given our consent and they just take the property owner's input and say, okay, well, too bad. You know what I'm saying? I don't quite follow it. I don't quite follow the process.
Madam Mayor, I understand your concern. And the answer to your question is the city isn't giving the consent or granting the application or the permit. Water Patrol, the county, is doing that. The city is simply saying, there's a checklist I'm looking at here of 8 different, it has 8 different steps on it. The very first one is that all cities that are affected must give written permission. The second step is all property owners, which the course directly affects, must give written permission. So once Water Patrol gets our permission, if the council so chooses, then they would go to the property owners. If the property owners are opposed, the application would be denied and the request would fail.
Okay.
Paul, what happens if this is Pam, what happens if there's like a split of residents? You know, some want and some don't. Who listens to the arguments on that?
Well, the Water Patrol does. You know, unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, the jurisdiction on the water falls within their jurisdiction. So ultimately, they make that decision. Even if the city were to give permission, that's really our only piece, and then the rest of it falls on the Water Patrol to follow the steps in their process, and then either grant or deny the permit.
Do they need 100% approval from all residents, 100% approval?
According to the application that I'm looking at, it does say that the cities that are affected must give permission, and then the next step is all property owners, which the course directly affects, must give written permission.
Okay. Will
And,
we hear an outcome on that? Once everything is said and done, do they come back and tell us what was the decision, or tell you and then you report back to us? Is that kind of how that goes, or?
I could certainly make that request. I don't believe that's part of their process, but because I think they deal with these fairly often, but it doesn't require a permit. So I never hear about any of those, but I could certainly make that request. With that said, this really doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I would, like I said earlier, I would refer to Water Patrol's expertise. This is what they do. So I guess it's up to the council whether or not you want to grant permission for this to move on or not.
Chief Paul, this is Councilor Mulder. I have one additional question. Is this just for this season, or is this a permanent?
I believe this is an annual permit, and I'm for time's sake,
I mean, we're at August 17th today. I mean, by the time they get this thing through the permit cycle, it's going to be Labor Day.
Right.
You know, it's you're kind of not at the end of the season, but you're getting close to the end of the season. Which leads me to believe is that if this is a one-time deal or if this is an annual deal.
It is. I've been reviewing through here, and it is an annual permit. And if they do receive complaints, they can revoke the permit. And I would agree with you. This is something that first came to my attention about a month ago, and we've been going back and forth ever since that time. And so that's why it took so long to bring to you, because it wasn't clear exactly what was required of the city. But
well, the other issue that I would have too on such a small lake, how far from shore are they going to be? Because this could really be really erode shoreline, which of course property owners aren't going to be very happy with either. So that would be another question.
Well, I believe they have to follow the 150-foot wake zone. That's
not for boats. No, see, not for boats. Boats don't have to be 150 feet from shoreline.
No.
And
Not 100. No, that's not what I'm saying. I didn't say 100 feet, 150 feet away from shoreline. It's 150 feet away from shore with a wake, and that's the difference. It's a big difference.
I don't think boats fall under that.
Oh yeah, they do.
Maybe on Lake Minnetonka. I'm not sure, but maybe you're right. But
I believe that's statewide, but I'd have to double check that. But there are rules about how close you can be with a wake. I mean, with your boat, you can be, right on shore, but with a wake, you have to be 150 feet out.
Okay.
Mayor, I think the 100% of the liability associated with this falls on the Water Patrol, not on the city. So I know that you have a lot of questions that I can't answer. I'm not a Water Patrol. I'm not an expert in this area. This was just brought to my attention. So the liability and the process falls on them. And if you're not comfortable with that, I can simply share that with Water Patrol and say the city's not really interested, given the fact that it's a small lake. Or we can give them permission. I guess that's up to you. But all of these questions will certainly be vetted out through Water Patrol and answered and dealt with by experts that understand this stuff.
Okay.
Paul, David here. Can you tell Water Patrol if there's full support of the residents, the council might be interested in it? Can't you reverse the process and let them do that first and then get back to us?
I certainly could. I don't know where they're at with the rest of it. I just know that the last communication I had with them, they were asking for written permission from the city. So I certainly could do that. Although I would suspect that it is getting late in the season, so they might want to just maybe do this in the spring.
Well, either way, they would have to get permission from all of the residents. And
correct.
So I'm not sure why they couldn't go to the residents first. And if every Minnetrista resident said, property owner, whatever, said, sure, fine, we're okay with that, then I don't know that the council would object. I'm not speaking for the whole council, but I think it'd be less likely that we would object.
I agree. I think I'd like to see that flip. That was a good suggestion, David.
Yeah.
I will gladly communicate that to Water Patrol. And I did request the actual application with the applicant's information and more of the details. They didn't provide that to me. They just gave me blank ones with the rules. So that I didn't get as much information as I wanted, but I'd be happy to pass that message on and see where it goes from there. And it puts the burden on them to show us that the residents would be okay with it. And if they provide that, we can move forward. If not, then I won't bring it up again.
Okay. Is the rest of the council okay with that?
Agreed.
Okay. Mr. Molitor?
It doesn't really matter. I mean, either way, it's going to be subject to residents' approval, whether comes to us first or goes to them first. So it's kind of pointless, but I guess if you want to do it that way, that's fine.
Okay. Ms. Bruce?
I agree with Mr. Molitor. I don't see the point in reversing the process, but because they all have to agree to get the permit anyway. But if the rest of the council wants that assurance, I'm fine with it.
Okay. All right. So I think let's get that assurance from the residents first. Again, I hate to have government say, yes, we're okay with it, and then the residents feel like we're trying to shove this down their throats or something if they don't want it. So that's one of the other reasons I'd like to get the resident input first. So that's kind of, I think, the direction we're going in, Paul. If need be, bring it back in August or at our next meeting. Otherwise, I think, yeah, okay.
Very well. I have clear direction. I'll proceed that way. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Are there any other staff reports?
I don't believe so, Mayor.
All right. Thank you. So we'll move on to council reports. Ms. Bruce, do you have any reports?
Just wanted to give some kudos to the Mountain Fire Department and the grant that they just got. They got a $151,000 grant to buy 22 new breathing units, the SCBA breathing units. So that was a lot of hard work that went into that. And I know Chief Peterson and Vicki Weber worked really hard on just justifying and positioning the fire department to get that grant. They did a great job. So just congratulations to them.
Okay.
That's all I have.
All right. Mr. Molitor, anything?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Mortensen?
Nothing to report.
All right. And Mr. Trumperlin?
We'll be attending the August Pioneer Sarah Creek meeting this coming Thursday.
All right. So let's see. Yeah, I attended myself and Mr. Brony, along with the mayors and administrators from the other cities, we did a virtual meeting on the fire district. And I think we're kind of at the point where if we want to continue these discussions, and correct me, Mike, if I'm wrong, I don't know, but that we kind of wanted a direction from the councils, if you're all on board with this direction, and if not, then we kind of need to put the brakes on this. But quite frankly, I think right now there's a lot of interest by both Mound, St. Bonnie, Minnetrista, and Spring Park to really create a district between Mound and St. Bonnie. Again, it's going to be many meetings, lots of information, lots of sifting through things, and a lot of discussions, but it seems to be getting off on the right foot here. And so we're just kind of looking for kind of a nod of approval that, yeah, you want to continue this discussion and see what happens. A lot of details will have to still be worked out.
Mary, if I could add something to that.
Yeah, please.
I think that the next time we meet is, I want to say, late September. And so
yeah,
it'll be after both of our May city council meetings. And I think what I can do is take some of the information and materials that Chief Peterson put together for the last meeting and include that in probably the information packet. So the rest of the city council can see what we've talked about in 2 meetings and have something to reference when, the direction that the mayor talked about. I think that would probably help the other 4 on the council kind of understand what it is that we're trying to do. It's still pretty basic stuff, but I think that might be beneficial. So if Mayor, if you're okay with that, maybe I could take a whack at putting something together that our city council could look at probably our next meeting. I have the materials, so I just have to find some time to do it. And then you can probably have a better discussion about if council's still interested. I think you will be, but I think it's better to see something than not see something.
Yeah, and I wasn't planning on having any deep dive discussion. And you're right, we don't have our next meeting until the end of September. So if you put that information together, we can maybe have a brief a discussion on it. I don't know if you want to put it on a regular agenda or on a work session, but I think we're just looking for direction. So maybe with that information, and maybe even put it on as a discussion item, do you think, on our next council meeting?
That would be fine. If that's what everybody wants to do, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Council?
I agree.
That sounds good.
Okay. All right. We'll see that at our September 8th meeting then. So that concludes everything that I have. And if there is no more business to be had, then we can adjourn if there is a motion.
This is Pam. So moved.
All right. Pam made that motion. Is there a second?
This is Mike. I'll second that.
Okay. And Mr. Molitor made that second. All those in favor signify with aye. Mr. Molitor?
Aye.
Ms. Bruce?
Aye.
Mr. Trumperlin?
Aye.
Ms. Mortensen?
Aye.
And I, Lisa Whalen, say aye. So motion passes 5-0. And that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the night.
Good night.